All right. So the goal today, well, let's introduce ourselves first. Victor probably needs no introduction, but why don't you go first anyway?
I'm Viktor.
Yeah, everybody knows Victor. My name is Dan Garfield, and I'm a co-founder of Codefresh. We've been acquired by Octopus Deploy, and I'm an Argo CD maintainer. So we're going to talk about promotions.
Yeah, actually, let me give you a background story very quick. This guy called me, do you want to talk about promotions? And I said, yes. In big part because I don't know more than half of the tools that are in this slide. So I'm not an expert in all the tools. He knows them all, right? But I also did not want to make it easy for him, right? So you will see soon I make it complicated. So let's talk about promotions, right? In essence, and I'm not saying that that's all there is to it, promotion is all about moving a release from one environment to another. That's what it is, right? You have a release, you want to put it here, and then you want to test it, then you put it there, you do something else, all the way until it reaches production, right? That's what promotions are. Now, one of the important things is that when you're moving stuff from one environment to another, it's not the same, right? Your image is the same, your release of the application, but your manifests are different. So that's one of the requirements that are important in promotions. How do we move things around and still maintain the differences, like, different hosts or whatever it is? And even more important in my head, at least my use case, is that whichever tool we choose, right, and Dan is going to go through all of them, how do we connect things? Because promotions alone are nothing, are completely irrelevant. They all live in SDLC, software development lifecycle, right? I want to build, I want to lint, I want to push, I want to test, I want to deploy, I want to test some more, I want to do something else, right? So there is a zillion of tasks we need to do, tasks that we typically do with workflows or pipelines or CI or whatever you call it. And we need to figure out how do we put promotions and GitOps in that story. And it's very important because it's very, very different, right? We are used to workflows where everything is sequential, everything is synchronous, and all of a sudden Argo CD and other GitOps tool come along and say, sequential, forget about it. We are all about eventual consistency, about asynchronous things and stuff like that. Argo CD in my head already broke workflows completely, right? We were lost. And now we have to think about promotions as well. And that complicated. So one of my questions I have from Dan is, how do I use promotion mechanism within my workflows, right? How do I connect it all together? What else do we have there? OK.
No, go ahead.
OK, so I know you all know what is GitOps. I'm going to repeat it just in case, just so that we are on the same page, right? Now, those are the 4 principles of GitOps, open GitOps. And I have a feeling that many people misunderstand what they are. But so let me go briefly, right? The first one says declarative, meaning that you're storing the desired state in a declarative format. What does it mean, declarative format? It means YAML, it means JSON, it means XML. It does not mean Helm. I'm nothing against Helm. It's not Helm, it's not KCL, it's nothing else. I'm not even judging whether that's a good thing or bad. That's what we decided GitOps is. It's versioning immutable, that's easy. So whichever tool Dan will talk about, that tool, actually going back, needs somehow to figure out how to give me declarative format, even though I'm not using declarative format in the first place, like Helm, right? It needs to figure out how do I keep everything in Git, right? I don't want it anywhere else. It needs to figure out how to pool things, because we agree that GitOps is all about the pool-based mechanism, meaning that I expect none of those tools to ever write anything to the cluster directly, right? I'm just following the principles of GitOps. So that's the third requirement. And it needs to be continuously reconciled from the desired into some other state. It's not actually actual state, but we can fight about it later if you want.
Close enough.
So those are the rules of the game. He will have to figure out. It needs to be part of SDLC, part of my pipelines, somehow. It needs to be declarative, it needs to be version immutable, it needs to be pulled automatically, it needs to be continuously reconciled, right? And you will see that not all tools are necessarily following all those ideas, but they are very, very important.
So before we jump into those tools, we're going to look at how you are probably doing this today if you're not using one of these tools and what the kind of manual process would look like.
So this is an example of what we do, promotions. Imagine that you don't have CI pipelines, you don't have workflows, you don't have GitOps, none of those things, right? How do you do promotion? This is a very simplified version. I'm going to test something, right? Go test. I'm going to build and push an image. I'm going to use YQ to replace some tag in some manifest somewhere. I'm going to apply it with kube control. I'm going to test it again. I'm going to modify it again. I'm going to test it, deploy to some other environment, and so on and so forth, right? That's how we've been doing promotions within the context of SDLC for decades, right? Not necessarily with kube control, but that's a principle. That's what we do, no matter whether you use those exact commands or not.
Yeah, we're pushing a change to staging, we're testing, then we're pushing it to production and probably testing again. We might have to roll back or redeploy or something, right?
So then came with GitOps, right? And that started to complicate things a bit, right? We still do some testing in this example. We build and push some image, easy. We modify some files, some manifest somewhere. We push it to Git, and then we have a challenge, kind of like, what do I do after I push to Git? And remember those 4 rules all the time, right? Because once I push it to Git, things are becoming asynchronous. I do not know, how can I run tests if I don't know when it is running, new release, right? It might be running 2 seconds later, it might be running 5 minutes later, it might be healthy, it might not be healthy, it might not be running at all, and so on and so forth. So we are breaking the synchronous process into something asynchronous. I do this, and that. Nobody knows when it will finish. But after it finishes, I need to do something else, like run integration tests, promote again, repeat. And if you do the same thing with pipelines, this is a script, but you need to imagine that you're using GitHub Actions, Argo workflows, Tekton, whatever you're using. We still test, we build and push image, we modify some files, we push those things to Git, and then something will eventually, in this case Argo CD, will eventually maybe run something somewhere, and we need to figure out how do I trigger a second pipeline after that. I cannot use the same pipeline because that would be clashing synchronous or asynchronous. It would be wasting resources, so waiting, and so on and so forth. So that's one of the problems we need to figure out. How once after I promote, and after that something is healthy and operational and working, how do I execute some other tasks that I have in my SDLC, right? Another challenge we need to figure out.
This model is probably looking familiar to a lot of you, and one of the challenges here is that a lot of the value that we get from GitOps is the observability of what's actually happening and having that clarity, but within the context of a generic workflow, because they are not asynchronous by nature, you have that kind of disconnect where you almost lose some of the value of GitOps because of how you're doing it. So we're going to have to bring in some different tools.
Yeah, let's show the tools.
So we're going to go relatively quickly through these tools. There's quite a few to look at. If we had an hour, I think we could do demos of all of these, and we would love to do that, but we don't have an hour. We have less than 18 minutes left, so we're going to go relatively quickly through these. These are all tools that are used for promotion today. And if you look at something like extending CI, this is what most people are doing today. This is what kind of the example that Viktor just showed. Basically a process where you build whatever you want. At some point it makes Git commits. At some point you trigger maybe a synchronization, maybe. You might do that automatically. You might do it manually. And there's that kind of disconnect between when you trigger tests and how that works. And there are a lot of challenges with this because there's lots of logic to build. It's not asynchronous like we talked about. Argo CD flapping is an issue. I don't know, how many people are familiar with Argo CD flapping? But there's a status. Sometimes the status will switch back rapidly. And so if you're relying on that to trigger events, that can cause problems because it's kind of unpredictable. And then you're either blind to the live state of what's going on, or you break the pull nature of GitOps by having your CI actually connect to a cluster to get information. So those are challenges.
You know, to me, the one I dislike the most is the number 5, where most of the pipelines I've seen after they push something to Git, you would execute, what's the command? Argo sync?
Argo CD app sync, yeah.
Argo sync, up sync. Kind of, if I wanted to wait for it to sync, I would have executed kube control apply. Why am I doing this in the first place if I want to wait until it's running in that same pipeline?
And that sync process might have a canary release in a part of it. That might take an hour or 2 hours or whatever. And you don't want to have a CI pipeline sitting there twiddling
If you work in a bank, it can take a week.
Now, one of the tools that came out early on was application set progressive sync. And so if you're using application sets, this is a feature that's built in already. Now, this is actually an alpha feature, but it's been alpha for about 6 versions of Argo CD. So it has had a fair bit of use already. And basically, you target applications by label, and you have your single source of truth in the application set, and it promotes based on changes to the application arguments in the application set. So to show you kind of what that looks like, first of all, you need to disable auto sync. You cannot have auto sync turned on if you're using progressive sync. And the application set will regenerate the applications, and then it will go through in the prescribed order and basically click sync for you and wait for those changes to happen. Now, it doesn't apply to the app source, right? So if something is changing in what the application is looking at, that is going to be part of a manual sync operation now that is separate from changes to the application set. And that also means that the changes that you want to stage need to be put into arguments of the application set generator, which means they have to be part of the applications that are generated, their arguments, which is something that we kind of recommend against from a GitOps perspective, because I don't know from Git what's supposed to be deployed, right?
Yeah, and the tests via resource hooks look like I'm going back 20 years in time.
Yeah, you can only do testing via resource hooks, right? And there's not a way to kind of pull back. Image Updater is a fairly popular tool. Argo CD Image Updater basically is a way to subscribe to image updates using Semver, and it will go and optionally update Git with what the new argument is for the new image that should be deployed. And you really have to pair it with a CI tool, some kind of workflow tool to do, and some tagging strategies in order to accomplish promotions. But those promotions are sort of happening outside of the system of Image Updater. But this is a way that people have been solving this as well. Kargo is kind of the first of the options that we're looking at here that is kind of the more fully featured. So Kargo has a couple of concepts. A freight defines artifact or manifest versions to promote together. And then a stage represents an Argo CD app with sync rules, like a subscription, kind of like Autopilot does, right? Like Image Updater does. And then subscriptions are rules for when to update, and it's managed with a collection of CRDs. And so you can think of it like, okay, my Docker tag has been updated. That's freight. So go and update the manifest. And at that point, Argo CD sees that change, it syncs it, and then that updates the stage, which is its own CRD. And you can run testing through an analysis template. And then once that stage is complete, it triggers whatever other stages are next. And those are managed independently.
So you're kind of limited to what you can do between promotions.
Between stages, yeah. Based on meeting the analysis template. Now, the analysis template is similar to Argo rollouts. So you can basically run an arbitrary container in the same way that if you're using Argo rollouts, you would do that today. Very similar. But there's not really a way to do testing elsewhere if you don't build it into the analysis template here.
Yeah, so you cannot easily trigger other pipelines.
Yeah, you can trigger something external with this analysis template, right? And then collect back the information. Telefonistka, there's going to be a talk. I think there's a talk probably on Kargo today. There's probably a talk on Telefonistka today. I can't remember in the schedule where it is. But this tool has a kind of different philosophy. This is actually infrastructure as code agnostic. Essentially what it does is it watches for folder contents, and then it just copies them over to a new folder. So it's not actually updating manifests in a targeted way. It's just replicating them to new. So it's kind of similar to application sets in that way, right? Where or some other tools we'll look at. But this is basically GitHub Action.
Yeah, it's somebody converted the GitHub Action steps into a project.
Yeah, and it's probably more designed to replicate environments rather than to handle promotion specifically, but it's in this space. And
but does that mean that kind of, I see copy to a new folder, that means that you need to have different manifests for each environment? Or
well,
is it
yeah,
going to copy the same?
each environment is going to have its own folder,
Okay.
and it's just going to copy the contents into one another, and it's not going to...
Without any modifications?
Correct.
That will not work?
Correct, yeah.
Okay.
Okay, and then we get to Codefresh GitOps, and this is another one kind of more fully featured, and this is one that I work on. I have relationships with a number of these tools, but this is the one that I have the most relationship with. I work at Codefresh, so you have that caveat. But the way that Codefresh works is you have a product, and a product is basically a relationship between applications. So these are applications that we are going to compare to one another when we go to do a promotion. That's just defined with an annotation to an application. You just stick an annotation on it, it becomes a part of a product. An environment is any number of clusters or namespaces. So you might have 50 instances of an application, which are all part of the same product in the same environment. And that environment might be 50 different clusters. One app in each cluster, right? And then a promotion is a CRD, which has a policy for creating and validating what happens. And you can do either manual or automated promotions through a commit or a PR. Now, some of the examples we looked at, like the application set, there's no git commit component to that, right? Image Updater has a git commit component. Yeah. Telefonistka does. And this one is also using git commits. And one of the big values of this tool is that it really focuses on the power of diffing. So maintaining differences between environments, you can do this using a promotion template where you specify which paths in which files are actually promotable. And you can also exclude paths from promotion. And then it will give you a diff, and here I'm showing like what the manual promotion process looks like, at which point it will do a commit based on the user's Git token. Now this is managed from a single CRD for the promotion flow. So here you can see that there's different environments. They have policies about which tests need to be completed or run, which hooks need to be completed or run before or after different steps in the promotion, and then the back end of these tests are actually managed using Argo workflows. So your Argo workflow templates are going to work here. And if you wanted to run an external tool similar to like Kargo, you would basically run a workflow template to trigger that external tool, right? And then we have GitOps Promoter. And GitOps Promoter, this is actually a tool from Intuit. There was a talk on it in the last ArgoCon. The way that this one works is you define your manifests once, and it is basically watching for hydrated manifests. And I'll explain what that means in a second. But essentially, once the pull request requirements are met that you've defined in Git, like your branch protection rules, or if you have workflows associated with those, then it will just merge them for you. And you can see an example of the promotion strategy spec here. So this one, we need to take a little bit of a detour on to even explain, because it doesn't really work without this, is Source Hydrator. So Source Hydrator is a feature of Argo CD that was released this year. And what Source Hydrator does is it watches your sources like Argo CD normally does. It renders the application like Argo CD normally does. It renders a Helm chart, right? It does, and that's what it's using to do diffing and all that kind of stuff. But instead of just taking that into a cache and comparing it against live and then maybe syncing it, it actually commits that rendered manifest to a new dedicated branch that Argo CD is actually watching for its source of truth. So this rendered manifest pattern in Source Hydrator has various levels of compatibility with the different tools that we've looked at here. So for example, with Kargo, this would work. With Codefresh GitOps, this would work. This would also work with Telefonistka to some degree, because it was just looking at the contents of a folder. But it doesn't really have anything to do with like application set progressive sync, because that's...
So it's not really part of the tool. the one you're talking about now, but something independent that
yeah,
any other.
you can use this independent of the tools that you're using, but it's kind of, if you don't understand this, then nothing about GitOps Promoter would make sense. Okay, so GitOps Promoter from Intuit, the way that this works is essentially you have your user dry branch. And when we say dry, this is like a Helm chart that I'm updating the values of, right? It's not rendered manifests. And once I make my change, I have here 3 different applications which then go and hydrate. So they actually render that Helm chart and they commit them to a proposed environment branch. So this branch is not connected to be synced to any cluster necessarily. But
it could be.
It could be. But GitOps Promoter is watching those branches, and as soon as it sees new manifests, it will then take those and essentially open up pull requests automatically into the live branches, and then wait for the pull request requirements to be met, and then it will merge it. So you can kind of understand GitOps Promoter as it has 3 jobs. It watches a repository for manifests, it automatically opens pull requests, and it will automatically merge pull requests when the Git status is clear. That's really all it does. And everything else is happening in Hydrator. It does have an Argo CD UI plugin so that you can manage pull requests from the Argo CD UI. So this gives you a kind of an overview of all these different tools. I know we went so fast. All of those tools have way more going on. Part of the goal of this talk is to just let you know, hey, you're probably doing this by hand right now, or you're probably extending CI, and you're probably not taking advantage of these tools. So this space exists. It's very exciting. There's a lot happening here. You should come and check it out. But if we think about the influence of these tools, you have Image Updater, which is really artifact-oriented, and that is the primary influence for Kargo. In fact, when Kargo launched, it actually had the entire Image Updater code base inside of Kargo. They've since rewritten that. But that kind of artifact-oriented philosophy is the driving force there. For application set progressive sync and Telefonistka, both of those are really thinking about this define manifests once philosophy as being kind of an overriding principle. And so that's what you see in GitOps Promoter, right? I define my manifest once, it goes and renders, all over the place and promotes those changes around folders. And the big advantage of that, of course, is that what's happening in Git is always represents what's actually happening in production. So I could go and bootstrap that stuff back. And then on the extending CI side, where you're kind of doing what you were doing at the very beginning, where it's okay, I'm going to copy specific elements in my manifests and update them, and then go through kind of a workflow process where there is testing and stuff. But in this case, it's asynchronous. That's the influence for Codefresh GitOps, I would say. Now, they all have a little bit of influence and overlap in some ways, and hopefully some of those things become clear. But one of the big goals for GitOps Promoter was looking at the deficiency of application set progressive sync, where you cannot have auto sync enabled. But with GitOps Promoter, you can, because the change is actually held in pull requests rather than in Argo CD itself. Now, there are a number of best practices that would apply if you're using all of these. We're not going to go through them all today. I think that's a great thing to think about. But ask yourself as you evaluate these tools, can you recover from Git at any point? If you can't, then you're probably not fully embracing GitOps, right? So application set progressive sync, you can be in a state where those changes are primarily driven by Argo CD. Does Git reflect what's deployed without looking? Does this enable your SDLC? And the interface is in folders, not branches. But state can be stored in branches as long as the interface is in folder. That's something that we would stick by as a strong recommendation. So with all these challenge rules in mind, Victor, sum it up.
I don't know. I feel that none of them are there. I mean, I still feel that the SDLC is the challenge, right? That I'm still not convinced that we have a good mechanism how to figure out when something is healthy in a cluster. And it's not healthy because it was healthy before the promotion, but it's healthy because something was promoted. So something still needs to watch that the tags changed, that everything is healthy, and has been healthy for at least a minute. So it's not flipping around and stuff like that. So I feel that SDLC is a challenge yet. I like the story about the hydrated manifests, because they can finally, there is institutionalized ways to do something that I've been doing for, so I have a weird workflow. In my case, my pipelines are doing Helm template, generate YAML, store it in Git, and then have a proper definition of the desired state of something so that Argo CD can synchronize it, which I feel that Hydrator is the one that actually does the trick no matter which tool you're using. Versioning immutable, we all use Git, that's not a problem. And I'm still not sure how to avoid syncing.
Yeah, the manual sync operation.
Manual sync
and there are tools, right? Several that we talked about that have those. I did do a deep dive comparison tip. We're not going to go through this. We don't have time. But I'll share a QR code where you can get all this stuff. But one of the best things you could do at ArgoCon is there are people demoing these. Intuit, Acuity, Codefresh are all demoing their tools. The people who worked on Progressive Sync are floating around. Image Updater, a lot of us have worked on that. We helped push the last couple of releases for Image Updater, so happy to talk through that. So if you want to talk more about these tools, there definitely are people and resources here. I've linked to all of them, and there's a QR code right here where you can grab a link to this full presentation and get everything you needed. Do you want to take a picture of this? Sorry, okay, you can take a picture of that.
Everybody likes Excel. Everybody likes Excel sheets.
Yeah, oh, it's a table? Oh,
yeah.
Well, the only thing better would have been a live demo, and for that, we may do something in the near future and sit down and go through this. Victor actually has videos on some of these tools. He did one on Cargo, so I would encourage you to all check that out.
I think we're out of time.
Yeah, we're out of time. We're happy to chat afterwards. Thank you so much.